the addiction is not the primary problem. Primary problem is, why did you not feel safe in the world? Why did you need something to make you feel alive when you already are alive?
But what is the myth of normal? Why did you decide to write this book, and now?
So to give the book its full title, The Myth of Normal: Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. And the point I'm making is that what we consider to be the norm in this society, in materialist, globalized, under materialist, globalized capitalism, which pretty much pervades the whole world now, what we consider to be normal is actually completely abnormal from the point of view of evolutionary determined human needs. And so that therefore, given that we live in a society that from the point of view of human needs and human evolution is quite abnormal in terms of what we actually need to be healthy and to be connected and to be thriving. Therefore, this makes this culture very toxic for human beings. And that is shown by the rise in childhood suicides, by the rise in addictions, by the rise in autoimmune disease, by the fact that in the US, which is the richest and materially most successful nation in the history of the world, 70% of adults are at least on one medication, 50% are on two medications. More and more children are being diagnosed left, right, and center with ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder or depression or anxiety. The New Yorker this last week had an article on the mysterious rise in childhood suicides. I'm saying that these are not accidents. These are actually results of the culture that we live in, and that what is considered normal is actually inimical to human health. That's what my basic argument is.
So you're saying that we're essentially suffering under the constraints of normal. Why?
Yeah.
Why is that?
The great writer, the late great writer, David Foster Wallace, who actually committed suicide himself, gave a commencement address at a university once, and he gave this anecdote of these two young fish swimming along, and this older fish comes along and says to them, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the two fish swim on for a little bit, and one of them says to the other one, "What the hell is water?" In other words, when you're used to something and you're in the middle of it just seems normal to you, and you don't even question it. You're not even aware of it. And I'm saying that many of the practices and beliefs and values that prevail and predominate in this society are actually taken for granted, but we're missing the point that they're very foreign to our true nature, and they hurt us. And therefore they instigate illness, both of mind and body.
Now, is this a modern construct? And if so, when did society start to segment itself into these highly rigid, one size fits all paradigms with regard to, I'm assuming education, work, parenting, etc.?
Well, all those areas, education, work, and parenting, are covered in my book. And I'm saying that all of them, the way we do them in these days, runs contrary to human needs, so that we're bringing up kids in ways that are actually harmful to them. And we take it for granted that this is the way it needs to be. Now, when did it start? Pretty much when you actually look at human evolution, how did we evolve? Like if you want to study an animal like a gazelle or a cougar or an elephant or a wildebeest, where do you want to study them? Do you want to study to understand their nature and their behavior? Do you want to study them in a zoo, in a cage? Or do you want to study them in their natural environment? So naturally, to truly perceive the authentic nature of that animal, you'd have to study them in their environment where they evolved and where they've dwelt. Now, human beings for millions of years are pre-hominid ancestors, and then our hominin ancestors, and even our species for millions, and then for hundreds of thousands of years, we lived in small band hunter-gatherer, hunter groups out there in nature. That's how we evolved, and our needs evolved, and we created ways of parenting and ways of being that met those needs in our evolutionary original states. Now, civilization comes along a blink of an eye ago. So if our species has been on Earth for 200,000 years, you can date civilization maybe back to 10 or 15,000 years, which is which is to say that if we've been around for an hour, then we've been civilized for 5 minutes.
Wow.
And that means that the way we evolved and the way our needs developed, we're in very different environments. So this unnaturalness that you refer to begins with what we call civilization, but it is much exacerbated by events in the last 102 years, 1 or 200 years, and particularly in the last 50 years or so, when there's much more isolation, there's much more division, there's much more inequality, there's much more stress on parents, which is documented, there's much more stress on the workforce, and therefore there's much more fear, there's much more anxiety, there's much more angst in the population, and parents are more and more bewildered about how to raise their kids, and that's the result of what we call progress, because we're progressing economically in certain ways, although even that is very unequally distributed. Like during the COVID era, as you know, the billionaires got a lot wealthier and most people got a lot poorer. So this is accelerating right now. And all of this contributes to ill health, to disease.
Clearly. I mean, with so many consequences to civilization, I mean, what are there any benefits? I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, look, if I broke a leg, would I want to go to a shaman or a modern orthopedic surgeon? You know, and in terms of producing goods for a lot of people, society is unparalleled. But it's a bit like the sorcerer's apprentice, you know, where Mickey Mouse is the sorcerer's apprentice, and as long as he's under the control of the guy who knows what's going on, he's okay. But when the sorcerer leaves and Mickey Mouse is playing with all these magical instruments, it goes completely haywire. So we're a bit like that. We've created these powers, but we're not mature enough, and as a society, we're not evolved enough to handle them.
I would imagine that one of our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have had to have been relatively self-sufficient.
Well, interesting you should say that, because actually self-sufficient, but in a communal sense. Like they were far more connected than we are. The way they parented their kids were far more connected. For example, today's parents are told to sleep train their babies, which is not to pick them up when they're crying. No, you try and tell that to an orangutan or a mother cat, you know, or to a hunter-gatherer who carry their babies everywhere. And they're connected they're parented in a connected way, so that all the tribe were parents to all the kids. So that there was this communal parenting is what was going on. Now, in our society, it's become very disconnected. Parents parent in isolation. They parent in a nuclear family home, if the parents are even together. And most parents don't even see most of their kids most of the day, which is completely unnatural when it comes to animal development or human development, historic or evolutionally speaking. So what I'm saying is that we've created something that's so unnatural that it runs contrary to what we actually need.
Wow. Is it culture though? I mean, is it a result of culture? Because humans, you know, we don't come with this innate set of instincts the way other animals do.
Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. Come with an innate set of instincts. We have instinctual circuits in our brains. We have a circuitry for parenting, for loving. There was a great neuroscientist who I quote. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago of cancer, but he's just revered internationally. His name is Dr. Jaak Panksepp, Panksepp. He found that humans share certain brain circuits with other mammals, emotional circuits that are instinctual. For example, there's a circuitry he calls CARE, C-A-R-E, which means that we take care of the vulnerable. That's purely instinctual. In fact, look at yourself. I mean, I don't know if you have kids or not, but you get on an airplane and some dad or mom sits next to you with the little baby, and the baby starts crying a little bit, what do? You go, oh, don't you? Like
Yeah.
it's automatically instinctual to care for the vulnerable ones. That's absolutely necessary for survival of the young, right? So we have a circuitry for that. The infant has a circuitry that calls him or her or them to demand the care of the parent. And Panksepp calls that panic or grief. So when the child doesn't get the attention and the holding, they go into a panic state, which is good because then they cry. And that cry is an instinctual call for help. Come and get me, hold me. These are pure instincts. We have a circuitry for rage, pure instinct, which is if I transgress on your boundaries, you're going to mount a rage response. Get out of my space. That'll prevent either of us from getting hurt. All animals do that. These are instincts. We share them. It's just that culture blunts those instincts. It flattens them out. And sometimes it goes contrary to them. For example, when you tell mothers or fathers not to pick up their babies, that goes contrary to their instincts.
Where does that come from? Like where does the hubris then from the, I don't know if it's the medical orthodoxy or what have you, where like that instruction, right? Don't pick up your baby. Yeah. Where does that originate?
Well, it originates first of all from people losing their instincts. And secondly, it originates from a society where the child's needs interfere with the parent's capacity to be productive. So you see, the parents have to go to work in the morning. So if a kid that wakes up 4 times during the night to be fed or just to be held, that's not very convenient. So then now we parent not from what the child needs, but from what is convenient for us to fit into our work culture. Now, in the United States, literally 25% of women go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, which amounts to an abandonment of the infant.
Wow.
That's how the infant experiences it. Not that the parents want to do that. They're forced by economic necessity and lack of social support to behave that way. But that means the kid literally is abandoned, the way the child experiences it. And what I'm saying is that these early patterns then translate into mental and physical illness. So I'm saying that we're actually traumatizing large segments of our kids, and that trauma translates into physical and mental illness later on. So you can't separate the mind from the body. You can't separate the individual from the environment, and you can't separate the individual from the social relationships and culture. So when we're looking at illness, we're actually looking at the impacts of culture. That's what I'm saying. And that's very easy. And it's scientifically, that's very easy to show. For example, a Black American woman, the more experience of racism she endures, the greater risk for asthma. Now, I could explain to you the physiological links between the stress of racism and narrowing and inflammation of the airways. Very straightforward stuff physiologically. No big mystery at all. But I'm asking you, is that asthma a sign of individual pathology, or is it a sign of social malaise? Or in fact, can we separate the two?
Fascinating. So you're saying culture can create trauma, which then can manifest as disease.
That's precisely what I'm saying.
That is fascinating. So I feel like nobody's paying it, other than you, of course. Nobody's talking about this.
Not enough. What's interesting is that, Max, if you look at the research literature, there's tens of thousands of papers about this stuff. I mean, I'm not talking about fly-by-night, far-out woohoo publications. I'm talking about major medical journals and scientific publications in all kinds of disciplines. So the research showing the effect of the environment and the emotional relationships on our genetic activity, or on the function of our chromosomes, or whether there's inflammation in our bodies or not. It's pristine and it's clear and it's overwhelming. But that research doesn't enter into medical practice. There's a big wall between research and medical practice. So most physicians, most of my medical colleagues wouldn't know what the heck I was talking about.
Not even psychiatrists?
Well, especially not psychiatrists, because psychiatrists are trained very much in this model of, and I talk about this in the book a lot as well. They're trained in this model of biological psychiatry, which is about that what they call mental illness is a result of some disordered brain chemical. You know how much evidence is there for that?
Very little, I'm guessing.
No, not very little, zero, none whatsoever. Now, you're talking to somebody who's taken antidepressants, and they've helped me, So I'm not arguing against the fact that you can intervene biologically in a beneficial way, but that's only a symptom. And the fact that Prozac helps me, which it used to, it doesn't anymore. No, it just gives me side effects which I have no reason to take it anymore, by the way. But when I did, it helped me. But the fact that it helped me didn't prove that I had a biological disease, did it? I mean, if you've got a headache and you take an aspirin, that doesn't mean that the headache was caused by lack of aspirin in your brain, does it? So you haven't, so that's really a false assumption. And the belief that these diseases are genetic, they're not. You know how much evidence there is that mental illness is genetic? Zero. That much evidence, or what they think is evidence is completely misguided. What it's really all about is the impact of the environment on human life, beginning in the uterus. You can already stress pregnant animals or women and predict that their adult offspring will have behavior and mental health and addiction issues. So that the environment starts acting on us as soon as we're conceived. And the more stress there's around us in a society, on the pregnant woman, on the parents, on the parenting environment, the more you can predict that there's going to be mental and physical illness.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the stress hormones, cortisol, is actually can be passed from mother to child.
Not only it can be, it is. That's the whole point. So that when a woman is pregnant and she's stressed, that child is experiencing high level of stress hormones through the placenta.
Wow.
Adrenaline and cortisol, the two stress hormones, they have an impact on brain development. So once I work a lot with Indigenous people up in Canada, and our Indigenous population is the most traumatized segment of our population. 30%, when I was working in addictions, 30% of my clients were Indigenous. They make up 5% of the Canadian population. 30% of our jail population is Indigenous. They make up 5% of the population. 50% of our female jail population is Indigenous. They make up 5% of the population. But I was giving this talk at a Native community here in Canada, and this fellow comes up to me and says, Doc, in our community, there always used to be a rule that if there was a pregnant woman in our community and you were stressed and upset, don't go near the pregnant woman, because we didn't want you passing on your stresses to the infant. Now, since then, we've had brain scan studies and cardiac studies and ultrasounds to show how embryos respond to mother stress because of what you said, the transmission of stress hormones. And so, yes, this is why I'm saying that it all begins even before people are born. It begins in prenatal life.
Wow. I mean, we know that chronic exposure to chronically high levels of cortisol can shrink the memory center of the brain, the hippocampus.
Absolutely.
In the adult.
Absolutely. And I was a very stressed infant, a Jewish infant under the Nazis in Hungary. I have very poor memory. I have very poor episodic memory. So there's whole events in my life that I have no recollection for whatsoever. And I'm sure that had to do with the stress that I was under in my early years.
How do you begin then to unwrap? I mean, that kind of trauma. I'm a Jew from New York, by the way,
Okay.
and I had relatives that were engaged with the war. How do you begin to? I mean, even begin to unravel that degree of trauma?
Well, it's not that difficult because it shows up in our daily life. So my first chapter begins with the following story. I arrived from a speaking trip from Philadelphia back to Vancouver, where I live, British Columbia. It's a good trip. It was successful. I even flew first class because Air Canada bumped me up to first class. So I couldn't have been happier. I landed at Vancouver Airport, and my wife has said that she would pick me up when I arrival. When I land, I get this text saying, I haven't left home yet. Do you still want me to come? No. At this point, I'm young and stupid, only 72 years old. Okay. So how do I respond? You'd think a mature adult would say, oh, gee, that's too bad. She probably got caught up in the studio painting again, and she forgot that she was married, so I'll take a taxi home. I've only known this for the last 50 years, How do I respond? I go into a rage, and I text back, never mind. And I take a taxi home, and I'm not even speaking to her for 24 hours.
Wow.
Until she says, knock it off already. So I knocked it off, which is a triumph, but what's actually going on is that when I was a year old, my mother gave me to a stranger because to save my life. And I didn't see her for 5 or 6 weeks. And when I saw her again, I didn't even look at her for several days. Why? Because my brain said, you were so hurt when you were abandoned that you're not going to open yourself up again to that kind of vulnerability. Now that memory, I have no recollection of that in a sense. I don't recall my mother giving me to a stranger in the street, but the emotional memory is embedded in my emotional brain circuits. And when anything similar happens, like here's the woman I'm relying on, not there for me, guess what? I react like an infant. So what I'm saying is, it's not that difficult to unravel that old trauma because it shows up in our daily lives about how we react to things. And we can work with that because trauma is not what happened to me now 77 years ago. Trauma is what happened inside me. So I have this wound of abandonment. That's what happened to me. That's good. Because if the trauma was what happened to me then, it's finished. It'll never be undone. But if the trauma is what happened inside me, which is I got this ingrained sense of abandonment, that's the wound that I'm carrying. I can work with that. I can actually get into the present. I'm not being abandoned. My wife just forgot to pick me up. She's an artist, So it's not that simple, but it can certainly be done. So what I'm saying is that the trauma is embedded in our bodies and our brains. We carry the wound of it, and therefore we can heal it in the present as well. And that's the whole point.
Wow. I think a lot of people hold the notion that trauma exists in our minds, that it's not physically embedded in us. Is it? Does it? So you're saying it lives in the body.
Well,
where?
I don't know what your life is like, but let me ask you this question. Have you been upset recently at all with anybody or ever?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, when you're upset with that person, if you can think back to that moment, forget what you're thinking. What's happening in your body?
You feel it in your gut. You feel like you've had the air knocked out of you.
Exactly. So it's in the body. As my colleague and friend and mentor, Bessel van der Kolk, says in the title of his brilliant book on trauma called The Body Keeps the Score. The body keeps the score, which is good because we can work with it.
We can work with it. Yeah. It's not some sort of abstract thing. It's like, it's physical. So it's tactical.
Yes, it's tactile, and it's a visceral imprint, which is accompanied both with physical sensations and with certain mindsets and beliefs. So that in the moment I get the text saying, do you still want me to come? It's both an emotion, a belief that I'm being abandoned, and a visceral reaction in my body. So we've got all that to work with.
Well, in that moment you were reactive, right? You snapped and you reacted a certain way. How do we prevent that in the future? Because I feel like that's whenever anybody's gets in an argument with their loved one or a scuffle at work. Our first inclination is to react, to respond emotionally.
Yeah, but what are we reacting to? We're not reacting to what happens. We're reacting to our interpretation of what happens. So, in the case of my wife and the text, what happened was I got a text saying, I haven't left home yet. Now, I could interpret that 10 different ways. One of them is she got busy, Another is she's in her, like I said before, she's in her studio, and when she's in her studio painting, the whole world disappears for her. So what? Or she's abandoning me. No, I'm not reacting to what happens. I'm reacting to my particular interpretation of what happens. And that interpretation is usually based on past trauma. So we can work through that past trauma. So we're going to have to react that way. Because we're not reacting to what happens most of the time, but to our particular interpretation. And it's through those interpretations that we can actually trace back what the trauma was.
Mm.
You know?
Now,
this society is absolutely great at trying to get us addicted to everything so that we don't have to think about these painful experiences. So with all these products and all these programs and all these junk foods and all this entertainment and all this sports and all that, most of it is, I'm not saying it's consciously designed that way, because nobody sits there and consciously designed it, but it functions that way. So that so much of what we pass for culture is actually an attempt to get us not to deal with our trauma.
Yeah, I've heard you say that addictions are not bad. It's how we're self-treating. That's ultimately how we treat ourselves from something that we've experienced that was bad.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you take a definition, like, and again, I have a couple of chapters on this in the Metanormal. Let me give you a definition of addiction and see where that takes us. Okay. So an addiction can be defined as manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary relief or pleasure in, and therefore craves, but suffers negative consequences as a result of, and has trouble giving up. So craving pleasure, relief in the short term, harm in the long term, refusal and inability to desist. That's what an addiction is. You notice I said nothing about drugs. I said any behavior. So it could be drugs, nicotine, caffeine, heroin, cocaine, crystal meth, cannabis, fentanyl, whatever, alcohol could certainly be that, but it could also be sex or gambling or work or relationships or pornography or food or shopping or gaming or any number of human behaviors. So I'm going to ask you a personal question. You can play this game if you want or not, but without asking for any personal information, or have you ever, according to that definition, have you ever had an addictive pattern in your life?
I've never been addicted to any like illicit substances or anything like that.
But remember, I said it doesn't have to be substance. I said any addictive pattern to anything. I'm not asking what, just yes or no.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna mention that in the past I was addicted to an ex-girlfriend.
Okay. All right. To the relationship then.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So you mean you were craving it, pursuing it despite harm, and you couldn't give it up? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was a relationship that at the time was, there was a lot of trauma in it, and we each had unresolved trauma. Hers, was more explicit. Mine was more covert. I've learned, but we became addicted to one another as a result.
Well, we always find a partner who's at the same level of trauma that we're at. It doesn't have to look the same way, but it's going to be at the same emotional level. That's why we find partners. It's like water finding its own level. So that's a given, But the question I'm going to ask you then is, clearly there was a lot of pain and angst in this relationship, but what did you crave about it? What did you like about it in the short term?
In the short term, I experienced a profound surge in dopamine whenever
That's analytical. What did you actually experience emotionally?
Emotionally, safety. I mean, at times,
safety, vitality. Dopamine gives you a lot of vitality. Okay. Safety, vitality are the good things or bad things?
Those are good things.
Yeah. In other words, every addict just wants to feel normal. So in other words, the addiction is not the primary problem. The primary problem is, why did you not feel safe in the world? Why did you need something to make you feel alive when you already are alive? No, in other words, what happened to you? So those things are imprints of trauma. So what I'm saying is that addiction in every case, I don't care what it is too, is a response to trauma. So this whole idea, this medical idea that is this brain disease, no, it isn't. It's a response to trauma. And it's an attempt to obliterate the imprints of trauma temporarily. That's what it is. That's what any addiction is.
Is there anybody out there who has no trauma, or is trauma something that is inevitable today? I mean, is it safe to say that we all have some degree of trauma?
Well, I think that's a very key question. I think, first of all, what we have to recognize is that trauma isn't necessarily big, terrible things happening to you. It could be a tsunami. It could be a war. It could be the death of a parent. It could be violence in the family. It could be an addicted parent. It could be emotional, physical, sexual abuse. It could be all those things. But it doesn't have to be those things. Because trauma, again, is not what happened to you. Trauma is what happened inside you. And you can be wounded without those big things happening to you. So you can wound kids, not just by hurting them, but by not meeting their needs, not meeting their emotional needs to be held, not meeting their emotional needs to be understood, to be seen for who they are, to be unconditionally accepted. So in this society, the way it's set up, you can talk about the big T traumas of those terrible things. And when I was working in addictions in Vancouver's downtown east side, all my clients had been terribly, terribly traumatized as children. All the women had been sexually abused and so on. But you can also have what we call small T trauma, which is more the relational trauma of your needs not being met. Especially if you're a sensitive kid and your needs are not met, you're going to be really wounded. And so in this society, there's a whole continuum of trauma, of course. It's a spectrum rather than definite categories. There are very few people in this culture who escape it. Very few. There are some, but relatively few, in my view. And other people might disagree with that, but that's how I see it. And that's why I'm saying it's a toxic culture.
It is, yeah. I mean, I've been seeing a therapist for the past year, and I would have prior to this experience, I would have described my childhood as being perfectly peachy. I grew up very lucky, very privileged, New York City, parents who loved me. But one of the things that my therapist has helped me realize is that my mom probably leaned on me a little too much emotionally when I was a child.
Which meant?
I mean, what I understand is that my brain at that point just wasn't ready for it to handle the kinds of adult themes that my mom was putting on my plate.
Okay, but look, so I understand exactly what you're saying. And what you're talking about is very common in the society, because when parents are stressed and bereft of help, they'll lean on their children emotionally, which means what? That the parent becomes the child and the child becomes the parent.
Yeah.
Which means that the child loses the parent.
Wow, right.
Emotionally speaking. And John Bowlby, who's a great British psychiatrist and a researcher of attachment relationships, he said that the parentification, or that reversal of roles, he says, is always a sign of pathology in the parent and always a cause of pathology in the child. And I've seen this in extreme degrees, and it results in a child in a whole range of conditions, from adult depression to autoimmune disease.
Wow. How could that contribute to autoimmune disease?
Okay. When I was working in family practice and palliative care, I began to notice that the people who got ill, it wasn't accidental. They had certain traits. And the people that developed chronic illness had a number of traits, which I talk about it in one of the book chapters. They tended to take care of other people's emotional needs, but ignore their own.
Wow.
They tended to identify with duty, role, and responsibility rather than the needs of the self. They tended to repress healthy anger. So they were usually the people described as very, very nice. They tended to believe that they're responsible for what other people feel, and that they must never disappoint anybody. Now, how do these traits translate into illness? Because what they all require is a repression of one's own emotions. Now, scientifically speaking, the emotional system is not separable from our immune apparatus and our hormonal system and our nervous system. It's all one system. So when you're repressing emotions, well, think about something. You know what it's like to be in a swimming pool and you have a big beach ball and you try and push the beach ball under the water. What does that take? It takes a lot of energy, right?
A lot of strength, yeah.
Yeah. Now, have you ever been angry?
Many times.
Okay. Now, imagine if you had to repress that anger so that you wouldn't even feel it, how much energy that would take.
Oh, a tremendous amount.
Well, that takes the wear and tear on your immune system and your nervous apparatus and your hormones.
Wow.
And that anger that you repressed doesn't go away, does it? It doesn't evaporate into the sky. It stays in there and turns against you in the form of depression and self-loathing and negative self-talk. Well, since the immune system is completely connected with and is the same system as the emotional system, when you're repressing emotions, you can also be suppressing and turning the immune system against yourself. And you talk to anybody with immune, autoimmune conditions, they have all those characteristics I just told you about. Now, why is it that 80% of autoimmune disease happens to women? Because who in this society is acculturated to take care of the emotional needs of everybody else and ignore their own? It's women.
Wow.
So that's why they have 80% of autoimmune disease. The good news is when they turn this dynamic around emotionally, they can also turn their autoimmune disease around. Because again, you can't separate the mind and the body. It's one system.
Fascinating.
It sounds magical, but it's just pure science. You know, when you're repressing anger, you're actually repressing the immune system as well. That's been demonstrated. So when people learn to express healthy anger, not reactive rage, but healthy anger, they're actually supporting their immune system.
So what does that look like? Healthy anger.
Okay. So, well, let's see what it looks like. So let's say I started insulting you right now.
Yeah.
In other words, I was transgressing your emotional boundaries. Healthy anger would be, stop it. You don't talk to me that way. So healthy anger is simply a boundary defense. Animals do this all the time. You're in my space. Get out. Arrgh. Now we don't have to fight, do we? Because you can't get out. You know? I mean, healthy anger is a in the moment response to a boundary invasion. Once it's done its job, it's gone. If you've told me to get out of your space, and I did, you don't have to stay angry. You might just say, don't do that again. But you don't have to keep getting more and more angry. That's healthy anger. It's in the moment. It's a response to the present threat. And once it's done its job, it's gone. Unhealthy anger, the rage, is when I transgress your boundaries, and you say, you're always doing this, every time, what kind of a guy are you? You're going to do it again next week. Hell with you. And the more angry you are, the more angry you get. So it's not just about the moment. It's about the past and the future. So healthy anger is about the moment. Rage is about past and future. And the more you do it, the worse it gets. Whereas healthy anger, once you've done its job, it's gone. So there's three ways to deal with anger. One is to repress it. This is which undermines the physiology, and you're more prone to get cancer, and you're more prone to get neurological disease or autoimmune disease. Or you can go into rage states, in which case you're more likely to get heart disease and high blood pressure and strokes. Or you can have healthy anger that says, you're in my space, get out. And then you're not going to suffer any physical consequences at all.
So how does this then apply to your experience landing at the airport and your wife not being available to pick you up? Because you did express anger, or was it more passive aggressiveness that you?
I experienced passive aggressiveness, and I experienced a rage state that had nothing to do with the present. I mean, there's nothing wrong with my wife saying, sorry, I haven't at home yet. You still, nothing wrong with that, So my response wasn't to the present, it was to the past. To some imprint that I had about being abandoned. And the more I thought about it, the worse it got, as opposed to expressing itself. Even if I'd said, you know what, it really upset me that you promised to pick me up and you didn't. And that was the end of it. That would have been fine. But to go into this rage state and this withdrawal, as you say, passive aggressive, that's toxic to the self.
Mm.
It's not just a mental issue. It affects my nerves, my hormones, my heart, everything.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, we talk on this podcast all the time about the toxicity of various industrial pollutants, of eating ultra processed food based diets. But this is a fascinating idea that you cover in the book, of course, The Myth of Normal, but that culture can be toxic, that culture can actually drive disease, which is such a mind-blowing concept.
So in the laboratory, when you're growing microorganisms in a Petri dish, what do we call that? We call that a culture. We call it a laboratory culture. We're saying we're cultured organisms. Now, if a large numbers of organisms in that laboratory brew started to get sick or die off, you say this is a toxic culture, But it's even more toxic. It's even more specific than that. Like you mentioned the foods, and I know that in your show you cover a lot of information about healthy eating. Unhealthy eating is number one, a response to stress because the junk foods are addictive and they temporarily soothe the stress apparatus. But not only that, they're deliberately concocted that way by corporations who hire high-priced scientists to find just the right combination of salt, sugar, and fat. You know this. In other words, we have corporate drug pushers out there who are making millions of people sick and die young in order to turn a profit. Now, talk about a toxic culture. That's sociopathy as a large-scale social economic strategy. And we see it in the food industry, and we see it in the pharmaceutical industry. We see it in the tobacco industry, of course. We see it all over the place. So, I mean, so the toxicity it's partly it's in the nature of the culture, but it's partly also deliberately fomented by people design devices to make little kids hooked on them. You mentioned dopamine. There's a company called Dopamine Lab, whose job it is to design cell phones so that kids get hooked on them. I mean, we're deliberately destroying kids' brains is what we're doing. And this is documented. It's not conspiracy theory, it's reality.
Gabor, how is that going to play out? I feel like if anyone's equipped to answer that question and to project out, this the addiction to technology on our youth, on children.
Well, first of all, we've got studies already showing that technology actually shrinks the brain, and it distorts it. And the more times kids spend on online or on these devices, the more likely are to commit suicide.
Oof.
This is not news. How's it going to play out? I think we're going to see a lot of suffering, ongoing suffering and division and stress in society. I think that's what we're seeing. We're also seeing an increasing reaction against that. More and more people are recognizing all this and they're determined to do something about it, which is a good thing. So I think we see two things. I think on the one hand, it's getting more and more out of hand. On the other hand, there's more and more recognition by necessity, and there's more and more people questioning what's actually going on. What have you created here? And who's in charge anyway? And what can ordinary people do? And what can we do as individuals or as groups to counter these trends? So I think we're seeing both an exacerbation of these dynamics. We're also seeing a healthy response to it on the part of increasing number of people. We're seeing both.
Yeah, thank God for the increasing awareness. So how do we begin to heal then? I mean, people should definitely go and pick up your new book. It's a wealth of knowledge. It's a fantastic resource, and I know that's sort of a loaded question, but where do we start? I mean, I mean, culture is culture. We're swimming in it. So what is what are some baby steps that we might take towards this ultimate goal of being healed?
Okay, well, the first thing is the recognition of the impact on ourselves and our society and our children. Number one. Number two, I talk about the benefits of disillusionment. Uh, when we talk about being disillusioned, people usually think it's a bad thing. I got disillusioned. But I always say to people, would you rather be illusioned or disillusioned? Would you rather have a set of fantasies about the world and live in Disneyland, or, I mean, some theoretical Disneyland, or would you rather grasp reality? Now, grasping reality is painful because it means you have to give something up. You have to give up the belief that you know what's going on. You have to give up the belief that your society is as good as you thought it was. You have to give up the belief that you had to do at some point. Not that your parents didn't love you, but you had to give up the belief that you had this happy childhood. Now that caused you some pain, I imagine, that recognition. It also liberated you. So that disillusionment, I think, is a necessary second step. Recognition is the first. Disillusionment is a necessary second step. And then you start asking questions about how is this playing out in my life? How is it playing out in society? And how active do I want to get, both in my own personal life? Like, I know people with disease, serious illness, who use the illness as a way to wake up. And they recognize that the illness, not that I wish it on anybody, but that the illness was the biggest teacher they ever had. They learned through the illness, or they're dealing with it, how disconnected they had become from themselves, and how that the illness was a manifestation of that disconnection. So the illness basically comes along and says, again, I'm not recommending this. And it's not like if somebody comes to me with an illness, the first thing I'll say to them is, oh, good, congratulations. This will really wake you. I mean, that's not a compassionate way of speaking. I'm talking about people who, their own process, have discovered that illness, terrible as it struck them when it first came on, actually impelled them to discover who they really were. So in the end, they were actually grateful. Again, it's not what I'm recommending. I'm just saying it can work that way. So we need to use our setbacks and our failures and our dysfunctions and, yes, our illnesses as wake-up calls that it doesn't have to be this way. No, in the book, lots of suggestions about how to work with yourself on these issues. I talk about working with yourself, working with others, using the illness as a teacher. I have a chapter on working with psychedelics. I have a chapter on spirituality, or the spiritual quest as a necessary aspect of healing. Now, if you look at indigenous traditions, in indigenous traditions in North America, they have this concept called the medicine wheel. Are you familiar with that to some degree?
No.
The medicine was with 4 quadrants. And I'm talking about North American indigenous traditions. 4 quadrants. They have a lot to teach us, by the way. One thing we could learn from indigenous people. Boy, do they have wisdom. Although we tried to kill it out of them, but we didn't quite succeed. So they have this medicine wheel, which has got 4 quadrants: the intellectual, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual. And they say the 4 quadrants have to be in balance, because if they're not, we're not in balance. So I'm saying, yes, we have to pay attention to all those 4 quadrants of our lives: the physical, the mental, the social, our relationships, and the spiritual. And in Canada, at least, indigenous people often greet you with, they say, all my relations. All my relations. And when they say all my relations, I recently did a ceremony with some indigenous folk here in British Columbia. They know every plant. Every rock is their cousin. And of course it is. When you do a sweat lodge, which is a ceremonial event where there's a pit dug in the middle of this teepee or tent, and they drag in these big rocks, hot rocks, heated up in fire, and they drag them in on big shovels and put them in this pit. Then they put water over them so that you get this steam. It's called a sweat lodge. And they call the rocks, you know what they call them? We're going to bring in the grandfathers and the grandmothers. No, they're related to those rocks. Are they not? Don't we come from them? Don't we come from the same earth? Those rocks are our ancestors. They get it. We don't get it. So I'm saying there's so much to learn from other traditions. So we can hold on to our Western science and celebrate its achievements. But we could be a bit more humble and learn from people who are much closer to the earth than we are.
Yeah. I mean, is that what's referred to as animism?
Animism is the belief that every tree, every rock has got its own spirit. So yeah, you can call it that.
In a way, very interesting.
You know, but it's just what animism really is recognizing that everything is part of our holistic consciousness, and not to be so arrogant.
Yeah. We definitely have become quite arrogant as a society. I feel like society works very hard these days to put everybody sort of in a single file line, get everybody to conform to, a certain to certain beliefs about the way that the world works. It's there's not much diversity, as much as there is this sort of, promotion of diversity as this noble ideal. There's not much actual diversity of thought, right? Like a lot of corporations now, they work very hard to one of the things that I see. Corporations now will work very hard to bring diversity into the workplace, right? But actually, it doesn't seem like they want real diversity of thought. They just want they have this vision of what diversity is supposed to look like. They
want people of different color agreeing with their basic agenda. That's what they want. That's what they want. Diversity.
It's not real diversity. It's like diversity on paper, but it's not authentic diversity.
I was talking to the actor Jamie Lee Curtis not long ago, and she said that in this society, there's a genocide of authenticity.
Absolutely.
So, and again, in the book, I talk a lot about authenticity, and what we suffer from is a surrender of authenticity for the sake of belonging. And the question is, can we hold on to ourselves and still belong? Can we hold on to ourselves to be authentic individuals and still be in respectful relationship with others? I think we can be, but this society demands that in order to belong, you give up your authenticity. And that's what makes it so toxic.
Yeah, it seems like society only wants like the most superficial expression of diversity.
Exactly. Yeah. Which brand of Coke, which brand of cola I'm going to buy? Yeah. I'm a Pepsi guy. I'm a Coca-Cola guy. Now I've got diversity.
Yeah, it's a big problem. This is so interesting. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. I love this. But is there hope, Gabor? I mean, at the end of the day, for us all of us traumatized, poor souls.
Well, you know what? So the good news is that human beings can develop, and the very fact that we're having this conversation means that whatever both you and I have experienced, we also have developed the capacity to ask some questions and to think about it independently. And everybody's got that capacity. So I have a lot of trust in the capacity of human beings to transform themselves. And so I don't talk about hope so much which is of something happening in the future. I think about possibility, and those possibilities are ever present, I think. And that's why I do the work that I do. And I'm pretty sure that's why you do the work you do as well. I mean, if you really felt there was no possibility, why would you even have your show? You must believe that talking to people intelligently and giving them information and bringing in speakers with diverse points of view is going to make a difference to people's lives. You're not just doing this I'm going to entertain people for an hour. I imagine you're not just doing that for that reason. I imagine that you must have some conviction that if you can bring some degree of information and truth to people, that's going to make a difference to their lives. So in other words, both you and I do is grounded in that sense of possibility. So the answer is yes. And you know what? I can tell you something. The human brain can develop, no matter what happened early in childhood. The brain's got the capacity to develop new circuits and new ways of understanding at any time in life. And to which I say amen, because I'm 78 now, and I would not wish to be as young and stupid as I was when I was 77, you know? So yes, there's hope, people. If I can do it, you can do it. Not that I've completed it, by the way. It's an ongoing process.
Well, you're 78 years young. I was recently. I had the privilege of getting to go to Necker Island to hang out with Richard Branson. Are you familiar?
Well, I know he is. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's 72, and that guy is a machine. He's running around the island all day. His shirt's off. He's playing tennis at 6 a.m. Kite surfing at noon.
Yeah. You
just have to will yourself into that. You
have to keep your mind open.
You have to keep your mind open. You
have to stay curious. Yeah.
But people are so lost, I feel like, nonetheless. I mean, all these resources are out there. Your books are out there. This podcast is free. People can, listen to this at will. They can share it with their friends and loved ones. And yet, nonetheless, there's still this victim mindset, I think, that pervades the current conversation. Why do you think that is?
Well, that victimization is an imprint of trauma, because when you're a small child, you really are helpless. And if you suffered painful things as a child, you were, in a sense, a victim. You couldn't do much about it, or usually anything about it. So that's the consciousness that's stamped into a lot of people. And then this society makes people very passive. Like the medical profession makes people very passive. It's not about what healing capacity do you have that I can help you engage and enliven. It's what can I do to you to make you better? So you're a passive recipient of my expertise, rather than I'm your partner as your physician in helping you heal. I'm not talking about mysticism here. I'm talking about a difference of approach. So, and if you look at other societies, when they made music, did they have entertainers on stage making music, or did the whole tribe make the music together? It was a communal participatory exercise. They danced together, chanted together, drummed together. There wasn't this sort of passive recipient of culture. Now we're consumers of culture rather than participants in it. We are relying on the stars and on the experts, and we're just buying it, but we're not participants as such. We're very passive participants. On the job, how many people actually get to make meaningful decisions? They're more or less passive cogs in a machine. You remember that famous Charlie Chaplin film, Modern Times, where he's actually caught up in the cogs of this big machine. He himself becomes a cog. And that, so modern life tends to makes us passive. And so not only do you have this childhood imprint of victimization, but then also society reinforces our helplessness, and we make all the big decisions. We passively allow other people to make them. Like if, for example, both the United States and Canada participated in the invasion of Afghanistan. No, take the average Canadian or the average American, and ask them to put two intelligent sentences together on the history of Afghanistan. How many could do it? But okay, the leaders say, let's send our troops there. Well, let's send our troops there. It's our mission. We're so passive. The media makes us passive. People are news junkies. What is a junkie? So what I'm saying is that we have the childhood trauma, and then we have a culture that makes us passive.
It's a problem. It's a problem. Well, I'm grateful that you are continuing to put out really valuable tools for people to no longer be passive, to stand up and seize the reins of their destiny.
That's the whole point.
Well, the last question that gets asked to everyone on this show is a tad philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
The name of the podcast is The Genius Life, of course. So what does it mean to you to live a genius life? What does living a genius life mean to you?
Well, everybody thinks that genius has to do with high intellect, but it actually doesn't. It's genius is the genie inside you, the spirit that you have, the intuitive connection to life that you have. So genius life is being true to yourself, finding out what the spirit is that's animating you. And it's in you. You just got to stop all the busyness and stop saying yes to every demand in the world and really connect with yourself. And there's a whole lot of ways of doing that. But there's nobody in this world who couldn't live a genius life from that point of view. You don't have to be an Einstein. You just have to be yourself.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
And your brain is starved of glucose and you have seizures, you can't move. But when you're on a ketogenic diet, and I've seen kids that once they enter a state of ketosis, they wake up and they can walk and they're just like, their brains have energy again.